The first thing I want to ask is, it takes effort to do anything. It takes effort to lift weights. It takes effort to do things. So to follow the type of lifestyle that some of you recommend, a lot of people are saying, yeah, I'm sure it would be good for me, but it takes a lot of effort. So what is the promise of all this? In other words, a lot of people are saying, I got a father who's 86. I got an aunt who's 88. So why would someone want to go through the trouble of eating a whole food plant-based diet and ideally a raw food plant-based diet? What are you offering them? What's the great offer here compared to the regular life that people are living? What's so special about a raw food diet? What do you get out of it? What's the benefit to make all this effort?
Well, we'll start by putting the foundation down that we share this extraordinary planet with about 9 million known species. Now, as I suggested yesterday, I don't know this to be a fact, but I've read many times that we think we're destroying or killing about 35 species a day we've not yet identified. But one thing that I can tell you about 100% of the 9 million species we've identified is they all completely survive and thrive on a raw food diet. The only species on the planet Earth that choose to eat a cooked food diet is a human species. Now, I know anthropology, which I debunked yesterday with the latest in anthropology, tell you that our brains evolved when we began to cook food. It's not biologically possible for that to happen. As an example, when you cook something, how is it going to make something grow? That I debunked today in my lecture. So the premise of what you are doing, you are plugging in to the energy source that was meant to allow the biochemistry of your body, the anatomy of your body to flourish, to thrive, to work at the highest level. And the second little caveat I want to put with this is that I think it's at a point now we've so lowered the bar. If we're alive at 80 years old or 90 years old, we think, well, that's great. But how are we alive? Are we functioning? Are we happy? Are we productive? Are we healthy? Are we contributing? And just to be alive and taking up space and breathing, at least to me, is not that interesting. And I've watched so many thousands and thousands of people over the decades I've done this, not only heal catastrophic disease and prevent aging as Anna Marie and I have, but in fact become incredibly important members of their family, their culture, their society. And that's what we should be looking for today. Not just to be happy we're not dying.
We live longer, yeah. In many ways, if you look at the birth, death at the birth in old days, a lot of times we lost children because of the hygiene in hospitals. But we have better hygiene now, although a lot of people get sick in hospitals too. The thing is, we are sicker than ever. So we're looking at, it takes 3 generations to recover our human species. It really is going to take. So what we're looking at is people, like Steve says, my aunt is 80, my grandpa is 90. Yeah, and probably they came from generations that had not been eating as much processed food as our young generation has. So we're going to pay a huge price, and it will take probably one more generation before we see it as extreme. And we will have to, all of us, go holistic, and not only because our natural resources are dwindling, and water is extreme thing that, I was brought up on a peninsula outside Stockholm and just realized that water is so precious. And we had to, in my home, we had to use water like it was gold. And most people think that water, it comes out of a tap and there's tons of it. All it is dirty water. It's very, very, dirty water. It's not pure water that has been cleaned through the underwater veins. you have underground veins that cleans water, and it takes years and years for it to be pure and come into a well, for example. And most people just don't realize that I can use it as much as I want, and it's going somewhere, and then my sewer will be mixed probably with the water. We purify sewer water, and it will come back. How much do you think of amoebas and bacteria will come back into your system? So we have to start slow down how we use water. We will have to preserve it. And of course, there's places in the world where they don't have it at all. And they could teach us a lot about the precious water. But it takes generations to see what we have done. So what we see today, we might look around and say, well, you know, these people are so much older and they've done well, but we are sicker than ever. And this is the time that we have to realize that everything that you do matters. If you can be an example to your family by changing, they're going to remember that. They're going to remember that you took that step and chose to take care of yourself and chose to not just waste the natural resources that we have. And so that makes a big sense for us now to talk about today too. I think because we're thinking of our own body very much, but we have to take care of all of nature to have a healthy body.
And I'll just add that, you know, the question you asked, Dave, was really, what is the promise of all of this to people that are thinking of making this kind of change? And to me, the promise is I think of myself, I've been doing this about 30 years, and in all honesty, and not to brag or anything, but I still weigh the same as I did when I got married 40 years ago. I can still run as fast, I can still do a handstand, I can still do the splits, I'm not on any medications. I feel like I'm still 25 physically. That's the promise. You know, my relatives that are living the standard Western way, they're on 12 medications already at my age. They can't walk up the mountain. I'm running up the mountain. You know, and this is really the promise, is that we live every day to the fullest until we're, you know, very advanced age. And you look at the blue zones, I am so in awe of, I can remember being at Loma Linda doing a few lectures there at the last conference I was at. And I can still remember a friend of mine, Dr. Scharfenberg. You may know Dr. Scharfenberg. He walked out of church on Sabbath. And I saw him and I said, Dr. Scharfenberg, is that you? And I hadn't seen him for years. I think at that point he was either 89 or 90. He was walking like a 25-year-old so briskly out of that church. And when he came over to me to talk to me, he said, have you seen the latest debates on sodium? And you know, there's one camp that's saying this and one camp. And he started, you know, talking about all this research. And then I said, you know, what are you doing these days? Oh, he said, I'm still speaking all over Europe, and I'm doing. And to me, that's the promise, is you reach these ages and you're still functioning. You're still contributing. You're still enjoying life. And I mean, that's what we all want. It's incredible.
Thank you. Audience question, anyone? Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I just recently realized I'm not taking any, like, I thought, like, by having chia seeds and hemp seeds that would cover the omega-3. And I have a 40-year-old vegan daughter who, one of my Christmas presents was this liquid, but it has, like, coconut. It's got, like, sweeteners in it, and I don't really like that. I don't do well with it. So I was wondering if Hippocrates, the vitamins that you sell, Life Give, because I use them, if you have any form of a real, or you could recommend a really good omega-3 that has DHA and EPA. Thank you.
Well, number one, you have to look at where DHA comes from. So the whole industry that has convinced the public about the benefit of fish oil and completely fabricated stories that fish oil were the only ones broken down to a usable form for humans. It's completely bonkers. Fish get the DHA from sea vegetables. So there are forms that you can get on the internet and purchase the sea algae DHA, the same place the fish gets it from. Just no difference from eating a cow or eating the grass that the cow gets the protein from. It's the same exact, it's an aquatic version of the same thing. We've been using for 3 years and doing in-house observations of an extraordinary land-based product called nature sage oil. It's a clary sage, a unique form, a desert form from the Mediterranean, and grows, of course, in the Middle East, that is phenomenal. The profile is phenomenal, and what I like about that the most, the perishability is very, very low. So it can sit around on a shelf without refrigeration for a minimum of 2 years. They think 3-4 years. They've only done the test up to 2 at this point. And we see that to be fulfilling. So, of course,
Is that DHA and EPA?
yes. So the diet itself, a living food diet, provides lots of omega oils. The difficulty is you can get too many 6 if you don't watch it. You can eat nuts, et cetera, that have too many 6. But what you have to understand is the algae oil is the number one thing to do for if you're not eating a raw food diet, if you're not eating a living food diet, if you're not taking sprouts that have it in it. My strong advice is to take both. Take the nature sage oil, take the algae oil. And what's the name of the company that we talked about?
Nutru, N-U-T-R-U. They make Omegazen, which is a algae oil.
Megazen Nutra. Yes.
Nutru, N-U-T-R-U, Nutru.com.
I wanted to add something, but I'm trying to remember what it was. When you're thinking about DHA and EPA and the need for those things is just to remember that in the human body, so when you consume flax or chia or hemp, or walnuts for that matter, they contain what we call the parent omega-3 fatty acid, alpha-linolenic acid. And your body has some capacity to convert that into EPA and DHA, which are the more biologically active long-chain omega-3 fatty acids. And these fatty acids, the active forms are so important because EPA, for example, goes to forming a variety of what we call eicosanoids, like prostaglandins and prostacyclins and leukotrienes and thromboxanes. And EPA and DHA also go to forming these things called resolvins and protectins that are highly anti-inflammatory. And so these long-chain omega-3s are actually really important for the sort of the flexibility and functioning of our cell membranes and our brains and our, we need this stuff. And what we know is that conversion is fairly slow and certain things can slow it down. So for example, Brian mentioned that sort of the omega-6 is getting too many. It can actually reduce conversion because the omega-6s and omega-3s compete for the same desaturase enzyme. So there's a process of desaturation and elongation. And so when you get too many omega-6s, it depresses the omega-3 conversion. But even malnutrition, if you're not getting enough nutrients, if you drink alcohol, if you eat trans fatty acids, these all depress conversion enzymes. And so one of the things we want to do is to maximize conversion. But even if we're doing everything right, there are things that can make conversion difficult. If you, if you come from a fish-eating culture, sometimes you don't make as many of the enzymes. So it's not a bad idea to get some of the direct sources that we're talking about, the EPA and DHA directly. And one of the things to know is fish. This is the point I wanted to make. Fish, when you consume fish oil, you can imagine how much fish has to be harvested or killed to produce a bottle of fish oil. And so we're literally raping the oceans to produce these massive quantities of fish oil. And one of the things that we don't have a lot of research on, but there's some suggestions that starting in about 2010, we started to see what we called the fish oil failures. And there were several studies that showed, for example, the GISSI trial that showed fish oil helped to reduce sudden cardiac death by whatever percent it was way back when, taking a gram of fish oil a day. Well, following these people for another 5 years, they found absolutely no advantage taking fish oil. There was a whole bunch of other studies as well. Now, one of the possible reasons, and just to think about this, when you take fish oil, you're often taking about a gram or 1,000 milligrams or 2. And one of the problems with that is these are the most highly unsaturated fats in the human diet. So they're highly unstable. And so they can be oxidized easily. And if you flood your system with massive amounts that are physiologically unnatural, that you aren't going to get just from eating fish, so you take these concentrated fish oils, you may end up with more oxidation happening of these particular oils. Whereas when you're taking the algae, you're probably eating 200 or 300 milligrams when you have them, which is a more physiologically amount that we can actually deal with in our bodies. And so that's just another point to consider when people are saying, well, fish oil versus microalgae. The fish oil is going to be, fish is only as clean as the water it's swimming in, right? And fish oil, same thing. And so you're looking at some of these environmental contaminants that move up the food chain, whereas if you're growing, you're culturing algae, you're not raping the oceans, there's no environmental contaminants. So there are a lot of reasons to be choosing these over the fish oil supplements.
Hey, a little addition. You may want to read my book, Killer Fish. Brenda said a lot of incredibly important things. I think the most important was right at the end, where she said the oxidation. What we do know from good science and common sense, that fish oil, when it's extracted from the fish, even if you took a fish out of the water, squeeze the oil out of it, within 20 to 30 minutes, the oils become lipid peroxides. Write that down and look up what a lipid peroxide is. It's a known carcinogen. So all fish oil are known carcinogens. As you see in the finished studies, there's higher incidence of cancers in populations that consume more fish than the oil from fish. And the oceans are going to be fished out by the year 2050. 2048 is what all the scientists basically tell. So that point is, to me, the most important point. Because it's not that you say, well, I don't care, I'm a vegan. You better care. Because when the fish are not in the ocean, as Einstein said, fairly smart guy, he said 5 years after the fish are gone, the ecosystem's destroyed, the oxygen goes away, and guess what? We go away.
You could raise your hand. I'll ask the next question, but you could pass the microphone to someone with their hand up. Brian and Anna Maria, a lot of people talk about the benefits of a raw food diet. What you particularly do that's different than almost every other whole food plant-based person, virtually everyone, is you, in addition to saying what they say, you then say at the end, and fruit, because it's picked unripe and because it's been hybridized, is something we should only have 15% of by weight in our diet. And then when you are asked about it to elaborate, Brian, you seem to take almost a negative view of fruit completely, where it seems like some people would say, well, moderate amounts of berries or moderate amounts, but I'm not sure I'm interpreting right, but it almost seems like you're saying that because the fruit's been hybridized, we should not even have it. And I know that, I hear all the other, Joel Furman, Brenda Davis, all the other whole food plant-based people, they say there's lots and lots of studies about the benefits of fruits, and is it possible you're taking too strong a position on it? Why isn't anyone else feeling that fruit in sugar intact in a berry is okay, and you're feeling so strong? So could you clarify how strong do you feel about the fruit, and where what's the reason the other people are not coming to this conclusion?
We sit in a very unique position than probably everyone else you've talked about. The sickest people in the world come to us. So after they've gone to the alternative doctor, they've been to the hospitals, many of these people are told they're giving up, then they show up at Hippocrates. And we have the great gift of working with these people and observing what is working for them and what's not working for them. Now, by mere chance, certainly not intelligence or science, because there was no science that I knew of in those days, nearly 40 years ago, tumors that we could observe visibly on people when they would consume lots of fruit, which we provided, by the way. They were the good old days. When you came to Hippocrates and we were giving you organic fruit until you got sick of organic fruit, would start to grow. And this was completely contrary to what the standard belief then, and seemingly for a lot of people who don't read modern science, believe today. That fruit is wonderful and has antioxidants. As a matter of fact, two of my colleagues and good friends at Tufts University were part of the research that showed you how great fruit was. And it is. It has antioxidants that are amazing. And when you get a berry, I've often purchased blueberries, because I eat a little bit of fruit, so we'll get to that in a minute, and put it in my refrigerator, gone away for a month, come back, and they're there. They have such great antioxidants in it. So all of that is in fact true. But then we started to look at the cancer. So we wiped it out initially at Hippocrates for cancer. Within a matter of a year to 2 years, we said, well, wait a minute. How about viruses? And Anna Marie was an expert on microscopes for about a quarter of a century. So we started to put fruit sugar that we actually created out of the fruit. It wasn't we bought it or it was fructose. Or we put it on the petri dish. We put a virus, a bacteria there, whatever it may be, a mold, a yeast, a fungus. And these things, they look like fire. They took off. So we instantly understood that that was implemented, needed to be implemented. So we pretty much took this very strong stance, not because we think fruit is bad, but we think in the case of disease, fruit is bad. When the Institute resided, we initiated in 1956 in Boston. Anna Maria moved the Institute in 1987 down to Florida. But in Boston, we lost a brain trust when we moved, because many of the professors and doctors and scientists would sneak over to Hippocrates and say, don't tell anyone we're here. But they wanted to help us. Because some of these doctors, in fact, sent patients out and said, you're going to die, and the patient would show up a year or 5 years later and say, look, I'm well, because I ate bean sprouts, And the doctor said, what are you talking about? And so they were helping us do science. So that's where we came up with the number 15%. And this is well before we have solid data now that we can quote on this. But the fact is that when you get above 15%, even in Anna's, Brenda's, or my body, you start to have exceptionally high amounts of sugar that then can become opportunistic. Not be the sugar that feeds a cell for energy, but exceptional sugar that's in the bloodstream. And sugar that's in the bloodstream, there's a term for that called blood sugar. And of course, we have a disease called blood sugar, but I will also show you that it can feed viruses and mold and yeast and fungus and bacteria. Now, when we started to talk about this, I'd go out to alternative medical conferences. They almost booed me off the stage because there was no empirical evidence. There was no evidence of this at all. I happen to be, this is how nature works sometimes. I'm on a plane flying to Los Angeles to lecture, and here in America, if you're not in America, how we evaluate one another instantly is we ask each other what we do. Anna Marie couldn't figure this out. She said, why do they ask me what we do? So I said, keep telling them you're a garbage collector. They'll leave. So the guy sitting next to me said, what do you do? And I mumbled, because I was reading. And I mumbled, I direct an alternative health center in Boston. He said, is it Hippocrates? Oh, my God, my aunt went to Hippocrates, and blah, blah, blah. And to be polite, I said, what do you do? He said, I'm an agricultural scientist in fruit cultivation at the University of California. That was the end of that trip for him. All at once, I realized that in biological human science, there was nothing written. As a matter of fact, fruit, which I think was the original diet of man, there's no question in my mind, as I showed you the teeth yesterday in my presentation, it was the original diet of man. It's a perfect food. Perfect food. He led me to a whole body of evidential science and agricultural science I knew nothing about. And seemingly nobody seems to read this, except the eggheads in agricultural science. And he told me, the average fruit today is 30 times sweeter than the original fruit. And to make a point for the listeners out there, he said, do you like crab apples? I said, oh, no, crab apples are too sour. He said, oh, that's a hybrid. He said, the original apple was more sour. I said, you're kidding me. And then he asked, what's your favorite apple? I said, Red Delicious. Why? I'm like you. I like the sweetest. He said, what's your favorite? He said, that's 50 times, 50 times. And he said, what's your favorite orange? I said, well, that's a Honeybell. He said, oh, that was recently created. That they actually took a tangerine and spliced it with a grapefruit, and who doesn't like a Honeybell? It's very sweet. So the point I'm making is that over 80% of the fruit we consume today at the beginning of the 21st century didn't exist 100 years ago. It's completely fabricated by man. That the average fruit has 30 times more sugar. And then the other bummer is that we destroyed the pancreas in our body, because hardly anyone ate processed sugar 100 years ago. Unless you were part of the aristocracy, and this group certainly doesn't look like it, unless a king and queen's listening to us somewhere in the world, you certainly don't look like the aristocracy. They ate sugar, and you know how much they ate? About a kilo a year. A kilo a year. So they bring it out like on Christmas or Hanukkah or Easter, and they take morsels and they lock it up. They had a piece of furniture they locked it up in their dining room. I mean, my God. What's ironic is governments came in and started to subsidize the sugar cartel. And it is a cartel. If you want to read an interesting expose on how evil these people are, the New York Times just recently published a large, elaborate, great story, investigative story on this. Everything's involved, like the drug cartel in this. And what we ended up finding out after all of this, and then now employing it for nearly 40 years, is that we by mistake became right. So now Stanford agrees with us, and University of California. And my favorite guy in the world on cancer, which I always focus on, because if cancer can be corrected, and if cancer can be prevented, all the other things are easy. I can tell you right now. Most holistic doctors like to work with diabetes type 2. If you don't get well from diabetic type 2 conditions, you're not doing anything right. Heart attacks, everyone gets well from heart attacks because no such disease as a heart attack or diabetic type 2. That's lifestyle choices. But when it comes to cancer, everyone's afraid and they want to keep their hands off it. I've watched hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people with catastrophic cancer reverse it. And since we stopped the sugar 40 years ago, much higher incidence of people bringing about their own recovery. So to me, it's not a theory, it's not a philosophy. It's not that, yes, we have everyone dancing and the research shows that such a thing. It is proof. It's a human proof. And I'm going to tell you, I loved meat the day I gave meat up, but I gave it up in a day. I love dairy. That took me 3 years. It took me 35 years to give up sugar. I just renamed my sugar. White sugar was bad. So I said, I don't eat sugar because it was white sugar. Then it went to honey. Then it went to maple syrup. Thank God I got off the train before agave syrup. The worst sugar of all. The worst sugar of all is agave. It's 90% fruit sugar. And look at Thomas Seyfried, my favorite of all. Thomas Seyfried, who wrote the definitive book in history on cancer. He basically, when he came to the Institute for our major scientific conference, sat with me for 3 hours on napkins and showed me what he learned about fruit sugar. Fruit sugar feeds cancer and other diseases more than any other form of sugar. Period. Why? Because it's the only sugar that metabolizes like fat in the body. All sugars make us fat, but they don't metabolize like fat. How much fruit should you eat? Do I think fruit's bad? No, I don't think fruit's bad. I mean, my God. I used to eat, fast food, pizza pie, and soda. So compare that to a blueberry. Hey, I'll take a blueberry hands down any day. But the truth of the matter is, limit the amount of fruit you have when you're in the conquest of fighting a disease. Eliminate fruit for a period of time until you get better. But fruit is, unfortunately, been tampered with. It is not the fruit of your great-great-grandparents. It's just not there.
And I'll just say a few things about that. But I respect very much your experience, and it would be wonderful if you could write that up.
I know.
Hold on 1 second. Start again.
Did that not?
We didn't hear it.
Okay. So I just wanted to respond in a few ways. First is that I very much respect the experience that you've had. I would be very grateful if some of these experiences could be written up and peer-reviewed and get into the literature, because I'll tell you today, after you said what you said about fruit, I went upstairs and went on PubMed and put fruit and cancer into PubMed. The first 10 studies that came up all showed very significant risk reduction with fruit consumption. There was only one that didn't. And you know why it didn't? They were looking at the amount of canned fruit people were eating. And of course, canned fruit, there may be some issues, like a lot of even added sugar. But all of the other, every study I looked at, one after the other, some were looking at fruits and vegetables, but they were separating them.
Yes.
So they actually had a % risk reduction for vegetables, which was usually higher than it was for fruit. Fruit was a little bit less, but very consistently showed both fruit and vegetable intake. And maybe it's because people who eat fruit are having fruit instead of ice cream.
Instead of meat, instead of
other things.
It's like oatmeal. You know, when people give up bacon and they lose 2 points in cholesterol, it's because they're not eating whatever. Eggs that day. Yeah.
So that may be part of it, but of course, many of the theories are because of the phytochemicals and antioxidants and fiber, and of course a lot of people are growing their own food as well. And so I go in the woods and collect elderberries, for example, and make a little mix. Oregon grapes grow in our yard, so Oregon grape and elderberry mixture to put on, in our little breakfast bowls. And so we do that kind of thing, and I think the wild elderberries would be a really good choice. But, Michael Greger grew elderberries in his yard this year, and he was so proud of himself. Did everybody hear this story? He took a couple of cups and put them in his smoothie, and a few minutes later he was drooling over his computer and realized he had poisoned himself, and he was picturing his tombstone, how not to die. Anyway, he was telling me this story. I was splitting my gut laughing. But anyway, I said, Michael, I did the exact same thing, except I was smart enough to cook them before we ate them.
Exactly.
Because black elderberries are poisonous. Yeah. Anyway, that's the funny for tonight. But yeah, so I think we still have a lot to learn, obviously, and I include a fair bit of fruit, and I know, Cyrus and Robbie that are doing the Mastering Diabetes with a raw food diet. Exactly. They're very fruit heavy and having tremendous success with people with diabetes. So we're still, we're in our infant stage here, understanding food and nutrition, and so all of these experiences are very valuable, and we can learn from one another.
Go ahead.
And so the Institute is a living laboratory. This is not laboratory with mice or anything. This is living laboratory for 62 years, seeing what happens to people. And the last 32 years, that's when we got stricter with fruit, because you learn, you have to live in the time you're in. So whatever worked 60 years ago, it doesn't work today. We've had to change a lot of things on our program. You have to live in the time you're in when you're working with people's health. This is the most precious thing that we can work with. And, so we see, and people see, and they say, I thought I had to have fruit because it's so much written about it and so much good stuff. And then I realized I don't need it, and I'm doing better, and actually I feel more balanced. Because we're all saturated with sugar already. We're living in a generation, we've had so much more sugar, like Brian said, than any generations. It is in so many things, because they took fat out of all the processed food. So we didn't get fat, because in the 70s people were screaming about it. And then they put sugar in instead. And so we've all are sugar addicts. Brian and I joke about it and said, you're either recovering or you are a sugar addict.
Yeah.
So
I'm a sugar addict. I'm just a recovering sugar addict.
We're a recovering sugar addict.
That's it.
And so fruit will come back. And of course, every a guest that comes through our program that now is fighting cancer, and we'll tell them probably in 2 years you'll have it back, but no more than 15%. And you will enjoy it so much more when you get it back, and you will only eat organic fruit, because any other fruit is so heavy sprayed that you shouldn't even come near it.
Let me just, before we finish this is an important subject, maybe one of the most important questions, because rather than debate this, we're giving you a little bit of a window into science. So I've written a book called Sweet Disease that I reference study after study. I didn't get on PubMed. They sort of, the convenient ones come up, or whatever moves to the top of the computer comes up. But everything I ever write is backed with solid science. And unlike others, not just solid science, but my experience. So I either apply a theory and then see science that will back it, or I find science and change my attitude and then employ it. So in Sweet Disease, each chapter is a different disease, and I give you the science of how sugar feeds that particular disease. And the other thing is Dr. Steer, so we got confused, who I used to debate on NBC, CBS, and ABC in Boston. He was paid off by the sugar industry and dairy industry. He was a Harvard nutritionist. And they would sit us there, and they know I was young, and I'd scream and yell, and it was always great TV. And I wish I was much smarter in those days. But the reality is Dr. Steer gave us a lot of the misinformation that's called mainstream science today on sugars. The different kinds of sugars, how sugars react in the body, as he did with fats, monounsaturated, etc. He was sort of the guy that set up a lot of this misinformation that we've maintained in science today. And it was a broken theory to begin with. And I think we have to relook at this entire thing. If you look at Seyfried, who used to be Yale, you know Seyfried, Thomas Seyfried, who wrote the book, he's at the top of the game. And by the way, he's the one that basically said, Brian, it's great you don't give fruit here. Why does it feed cancer? I said, well, because it does this. He said, no, you're wrong. And he sat me down for 3.5 hours at the Institute in Wigmore Hall and showed me on papers what he learned in decade after decade of doing it. And he was the one that actually explained to me that it's a Warburg theory of why fruit creates cancer. Warburg goes back to research from 1920 to 1924, published it, and got the Nobel Prize in the 1930s for it. And he said, all you have to do is reduce oxygen by 1/3. Every healthy person here, if we reduced our oxygen by 1/3, you start to actually create cancer cells in the body, with no exception. Now, if you're weak, lots of cancer cells. And if you metabolize fruit sugar as fat, guess what you're doing? You're reducing oxygen. If you already have cancer and you reduce oxygen, do you think that may help to metastasize the cancer? Or spread the virus? And so I do think so. So, and again, what Anna said I think is most pertinent to this conversation. You don't know how many people were on fruit diets and have come to us. Thousands, as I was. My diet was 60% fruit at one point. And I felt great because it wasn't hamburgers, and it wasn't steak, and it wasn't pizza pie, and it wasn't all of the garbage I ate. But I'm going to tell you, if I compare how strong, muscular, mentally, physically I am today compared on greens, which gorillas eat, by the way. Gorillas do not eat fruit. Versus monkeys running around like this, eating, it's night and day, man. It's night and day. It's night and day. And why gorillas happen to be the strongest creature on earth, they don't eat fruit. They happen to eat greens. And by the way, they eat sprouts in nature. They'll actually pick the root up, clean the root, and eat the sprout. Instinctually, they know that that's the strongest part.
So just because this is a topic that keeps getting brought up over and over and again, and it would be good to really clarify it, what about Brenda, what Brenda's saying, that there's study after study saying fruits are good, and you have the extreme where Doug Graham is saying, I've healed tons of people on an all-fruit diet, on the 80-10-10 diet, and then you have people who are saying, you don't have to be that extreme, but just moderate amounts, it fits into the diet. So again, are you taking too strong a position on fruit, or are you really feeling like this is really...
There always has to be somebody that is at the head of the arrow, and that's where I think we are at this point. When I was a macrobiotic, and such a good macrobiotic, I wrote one of Michio Kushi's books with him. I finally realized it wasn't what people were eating in the macrobiotic diet that was making them well. It's what they removed from their diet that made them well. And I think it's the same exact thing with heavy fruit consumption. If I compare my old American diet, Western diet, to when I was eating fruit, I felt remarkable on fruit. Because again, this is where it gets a little confusing for you. Fruit was the original diet of man. There's absolutely no question in my mind or serious anthropologists' minds today. And if you didn't see it here in the room yesterday, review on The Real Truth About Health, the conference I gave where I showed actually the teeth of your ancestors and your teeth. And the intestinal, and you look closely, it shows all of the reasons we were frugivorous. So by removing bad things, by eating more raw food, it has enzymes, phytochemicals, loaded with not nearly sprouts. Sprouts have a lot more without the sugar. But the reality is that's phytochemicals. Do you think Pepsi-Cola has phytochemicals? You think hamburgers have phytochemicals? No. So you're going to get the benefits of it. But again, if I took heroin, I could actually show you nutritional benefit of eating heroin. Yeah, there's always good and bad in everything. And I don't want to sound like this is going to discourage any of you from thinking, gee, I've been eating fruit, it's a great thing. God bless you. You've made a great step in the right direction. Congratulations. You're not eating donuts anymore. You're not eating, God knows, candy bars anymore. So that's good. But if you are fighting a disease, my message is loud and clear, not extreme, but experiential and scientifically validated today. Stop eating fruit temporarily. Now, what people forget in the process of recovery is someday you're trying to get better. And once you get better, then you can do things in moderate forms. By the way, Sheila's in one of the most beautiful places in North America, I can tell you. It's actually in Canada and it's warm. Isn't that an oxymoron? It's beautiful and warm. If I had elderberries in my backyard, if I had blueberries growing, which they do starting in May and up there, I'd be out there eating them too. And by the way, I eat some fruit now. I'm not suggesting I don't eat fruit. This is not a religion. This isn't fanaticism. I look at these things in practical ways. So please embrace moving forward, staying open, and learning what needs to be learned today. If you want to know more about it, I'm not trying to sell books. I'm trying to give you real science. That's not cherry-pick science or what's the hottest thing on the internet. Read my book, Sweet Disease. It will explain this in detail for you.
So you can give her a microphone. That's the next question. So if you have a question, I'm going to ask a question, then she will, and then just raise your hands after that so that she'll know to give it to you. So last night we had a panel on whole food plant-based diets. There's a lot of great whole food plant-based speakers, and a lot of us are feeling like, look, we're vegan. We're eating beans, we're eating grains, whole grains, quinoa, millet, amaranth, teff, buckwheat, wild rice. We're eating vegetables. We're heroes. We're the most extreme people we know. We're healthier than anyone. And so the question is, are you saying, actually, you're suggesting we go further and that the beans and the whole grains are sprouted before we eat them, and that we take clover, onion, garlic, cress, alfalfa seeds and sprout them? Are you saying that being a whole food plant-based diet is not enough, that we have to go further and eat a raw diet? I mean, what it seems like the other speakers are saying whole food plant-based offers you so much benefits. Why do we have to go even further and say sprout the beans, sprout the whole grains, sprout all those alfalfa, clover-looking things? Why do we have to go further? Isn't it enough if we're eating a whole food plant-based organic diet with non-glutinous grains? Like, why do we have to go further and eat it raw?
I don't want to monopolize this, but I can't hold myself back. Most of my colleagues who I love and respect, and we're not at war, we're the army of love that I hope more people join. And I have enormous respect, and we all have different placements in this army. And some people are ready to listen to moderate considerations today. Some people really want maximum considerations today. So as we sit together, you're given that offering. But here's what we know. I don't know one of these people who don't consider themselves an environmentalist. Well, if you consider yourself an environmentalist and you're not taking 1 pound of seed and producing 10 pounds of food, you're not really an environmentalist. And that's what we're talking about. The average increase is 10 times when you sprout something. Number 2, one of my colleagues and friends, the most brilliant guy on the planet Earth when it comes to phytochemicals and nutrients, Dr. David Williams, Linus Pauling Institute, shows us that, by the way, that sprouts by far, hands down, no question, out of everything, vegetables that were grown in California, and here in New York you're eating them 5 weeks later. Sprouts that are growing at the time, you put them in your mouth and they burst energy out, have significantly higher amounts, significantly, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 times more of these phytochemicals that are medicines. Anti-aging, anti-cancer, antiviral, antibacterial, anti-parasitic medicines in them. So that's number 2. So environmental factors, health factors, and how about starvation factors? I had the great privilege in my life to work under the Sadat government in Egypt. I was in Israel teaching back in the 70s, and they said, you come over and teach in the United Nations. And I felt, a little egocentric at the time, almost like Christ-like, because we were ordering 100-pound bags of grains for less than $3, $2 and some cents each, and producing 1,000 pounds of food in villages where people were hungry. And God forbid we have starving people. When we're throwing away in the United States alone, $3 million of grain a day to keep artificially low prices. If you just took those grains, you could feed hungry people worldwide, period. We don't need any more food. We have more food. We throw away in North America 40% of the food we're served. We throw it away because we're arrogant and we're greedy and we're out of touch. So thank God my colleagues are at places of moderation for people who are coming into this, as I was at one point. If I heard Brian Clement 50 years ago, I would walk out the room. I'd say, this guy's out of his mind. He's out of his mind. You mean to tell me I don't even know what a sprout was 50 years ago? Now I'm an expert in sprouts. Green juice, if I saw green juice, I assure you I would have gagged and upchuck. I wouldn't even have had to get it to my mouth. Would have gagged and upchuck. Because I used to look at parsley and gag and upchuck. So I get it. I'm not here to say, no, we know everything. We don't know everything. But we know a shitload. Because no one else has 62 years of experience and worked with hundreds of thousands of people that, in fact, are the sickest people in the world. After they've done moderate things and it failed, they come to us. And we do clinical research. We don't publish it. They're already after us. So what we do is invite any organization, and I do this worldwide now, legitimate organization to come and we will open up our research for you to publish a study. Because the day I tell people that what we do works, we won't be here anymore. I can tell you that right now. So we're not in the game of academic dueling. We're not in that game. Our job is to help people to help themselves, to give you tools that we've learned work, and to keep improving it. Keep improving it. And come and learn from Brenda and Joel and everyone else you've seen and everyone else that's here, because we all have something valuable. We learn something every single day from each other.
And John Hopkins did a big research about broccoli sprouts. I mean, out of the blue, that was like the most anti-cancer sprout ever. And they took monopoly. We couldn't even buy the seeds for a long time. And then they finally made a pill because they didn't think people were going to sprout the seeds. But lots of people. And you can buy broccoli sprouts in every store now. So it's a trend. You can buy sprouts. Like I went to Whole Foods and I bought a ton of sprouts and grains and beans that were sprouted. And it's a trend. We might sound like we're really aggressive about it, but because we've worked with it for so many years, we've seen it, we've done it, and all of us are forerunners. But you're seeing it coming up in restaurants, in the stores. People are wanting this more and more, and it's coming. Even kelp, people are growing kelp now in the
Kelp
ocean
noodles.
up here. And people are realizing what amazing nourishment, chlorophyll, omega-3, and the stuff. So a lot of people are asking for this now, and it's because we've been talking about it and showing people. So it takes years for things to be normal. But one day people will say, well, why didn't we ever think about it? So a seed, and not the grain and bean that I sprout, I actually break down protein to amino acid, fat to fatty acid, carb to simple sugar. This is baby food. We have a lot of our guests that comes and they have severe IBS or Crohn's and colitis, and they've been told you cannot eat any raw food. And I will tell them, you the first one that cannot eat our food if you think so, because everybody can eat raw food. Actually, raw food, sprouts, is the only thing that will help to heal somebody with those gastrointestinal problems. So it's like totally opposite of what you've been told.
You saw the young man last night, 25 years with it. Not only did his stage 4 cancer go away on the raw food, but his colitis did.
Question. I was looking at your cookbooks. Is this on? Yeah. At your cookbooks, and I noticed I saw some salt and I saw some fructose and stevia, and also what surprised me was olive oil, because I've heard that if you use olive oil, it's liquid oil into your veins, and if you have problems with circulation, not cut out oil altogether. And I wanted to know what your thoughts are and what you are recommending for us when we go home and we go by your cookbooks.
Well, you know, so when you write a cookbook, you make you take it out of your experience. And stevia is not a sugar. Stevia is a natural sweetener. It's in the family of licorice. And it's something that actually helps you if you have diabetes. If you have cancer, you can use it. And it's very sweet. If you ever drank wheatgrass, it's kind of like wheatgrass sweet. So you don't need much anyway. And olive oil is, yes, we have, if you look at our condiment table at the Institute, we have olive oil and hemp oil. And we have like Bragg's, we have Nama shoyu, because a lot of people are in the
Pizza pie month.
transition time. and and you know, we don't want to take everything away. We don't use much of anything on our salad because we've been eating it so long, but most people need something on top. And of course, our olive oil, we find the most first press, organic. Of course, it's very good. I don't want my salad to swim in it, but if I have, for example, a mister and I spray my salad with that, that is fine. Because I'm not eating any animal products. I'm not getting that kind of trans fats. So a little bit of that fat that I get there, together with a big salad of sprouts, and maybe I have some nuts or seeds, or I have avocado, that is fine. So we don't want you to go out of here and be hysteric, like there's no oils that we can use, there's no fruit that you can use. No, I mean, it's absolutely, every person that comes to us, for example, get an individual program, and it depends on where we're at. So we looked at all those things making this book.
When you use olive oil, is it true that olive oil has no minerals, vitamins, nothing that's alive, nothing that's...
Now, where did you hear it has no minerals?
Yeah, this is cold press.
Yeah.
But anything alive that's...
Well, sure, it's alive. I mean,
Yes.
raw olive oil is alive.
Is it just fat?
Sure, it's a fat. It has a very, very small amount of saturated fat. It's a monounsaturated, meaning that why you see it get solid at 32 and at 33 get loosen up, that's a sign of a monounsaturated.
So it doesn't clog up our vessels, our blood vessels?
No, look at, I mean, probably, and you can speak to the research even more than I do. I've read it a million times, but look at the Mediterranean diet. One of the reasons they keep saying, hey, those people live longer in southern Italy than they do in Greece, than anywhere else, is they attribute that in great part to the benefit they're getting from. I'm not sure that's all true. I don't think they eat a lot of meat. They don't eat, that's really it. But the fact is, olive oil is not a problem for you. Now, let me say this. You may be alluding Dr. Esselstyn, who I love and respect. Remember, he comes through the window, thank God, of cardiovascular disease. And so when you have cardiovascular disease, I would tell you, please don't eat any oil and any of that stuff for a period of time. And so that I agree with. But again, the real problem we have, you don't take any oil, you don't eat foods like sprouts all the time. And not everyone does. You know, you're going to end up with dementia. You're going to end up with problems in the future. One of the difficulties we have eating healthy diets, if they're not really comprehensively healthy, is we end up with a lack of essential fats. And that's a problem. That's a problem. And I grew up here in the New York area, a lot of Italian friends. I grew up eating a lot of olive oil. I happen to prefer olive oil. Is it as good as some of the other oils? No. I don't like the taste of hemp oil. I just don't like the taste of it. It's much better for you, but it's not shea oil. If you can find it, great oil. But the fact of the matter is, where we're not extreme, as Anna Marie says, you've got to make bridges sometimes. And if you don't make now, we individualize. You have a heart attack, don't take oil for a bit. Not forever, for a bit.
Thank you. Kind of a two-part question. If you could address the healing concept of seeded versus unseeded fruits and vegetables. And number two, maybe just kind of a quick synopsis of the philosophical differences between Hippocrates and natural hygiene. Thank you.
Why don't you go on that? Seeded. Oh, no. Seeded, no, I'll do the Hippocrates part. The seeded versus unseeded, yeah.
Fruits, I mean, I guess the seeded versus unseeded, I mean, fruits
They should all have
seeds.
seeds. They should have seeds.
If you're thinking about the ones that you would actually eat the seeds versus the ones that the seeds are, you don't eat the pit of a peach or a plum, versus a raspberry or something like that where you're actually eating the seeds. Obviously, when you're eating fruits with these that have a lot of small little seeds, the seeds have a lot of value, a lot of fiber and also some phytochemicals, and quite often even more concentrated in those than some of the flesh. But I definitely am not an expert on that.
No, either not.
No. So that's a good question, though.
The only thing I can add to that is that when the berry thing came up and my colleagues from Tufts said this is great for the brain, it's great for the heart, it's great for everything, around the same time, Canadians got a hold of me, young, like 20-year-old Canadians, and they said, would you like to buy the seeds of blueberries? As much as you think, I was like shocked that you could buy the seeds of blueberries. And I said, why not? And so, of course, we know cranberry seeds have the most antioxidant effect of any seed. As a matter of fact, it's loaded with vitamin D. There's a great product on the market now for vitamin D. The main ingredient is the oil from cranberry seeds. Black raspberry seeds. Much better, by the way. These are 40, 50, 60 times better, more beneficial than the blackberry itself, which is noted for the brain building, cardiovascular building, blueberries, etc. And again, Stephen, who I've known for 25, 30 years, every season he keeps, now what about the blueberries? He's asked me that question about 1 million times. I tell him, look, I eat blueberries too. And if you can pick blueberries or go to Maine here or in Europe, blueberries, knock yourself out, providing you're not sick. Now, natural hygiene was a movement that began in the 19th century in Europe. And I think it was a pretty interesting movement because it was a time that the Industrial Revolution came up and people were starting to leave the land rather than stay on the land. And they said, we want to eat very pure. Arnold Ehret indirectly was part of that, one of the great leaders in the very initial programs of vegan diets and mucusless diet healing system. And then you had the next generation that came from all over the world. And my hero, it's interesting because I met a doctor recently and we both fell in love with this man, and that's why both of us got into this work. Paul Bragg, what he did, just an enormous, extraordinary character that was committed to people being healthy. And then Jack LaLanne was actually because of Paul Bragg, he came back to health. So, we get a lot of credit. We're this is easy for us compared to that. So I give an amazing amount of respect for natural hygiene. I think that probably some of the blueprints of Hippocrates came out of that. And we then moved into modern times. And we realized when you, in the 1800s, had your own farm and the neighbor had a farm and you were eating fresh, organic, raw food off that farm, It was incredibly nourishing. If you ever went to a garden or a farm and picked something, and washed it and ate it, you know what I mean. But that's not who we are anymore. You know, I was stunned. I was in California lecturing a number of years ago, and I mentioned something. We must be getting this, you know, food from California on the East Coast. A week later, and a guy stood up who was a truck driver. His whole family was on the Hippocrates program. His wife had healed cancer on the Hippocrates program, and said to me, I don't want to criticize you, but you're wrong. We have nitrogen in the trailers, and it could be up to 5 weeks before you get the food on your table. What nutrition is in there? So Ann Wigmore, with her wisdom, certainly not me. I can't take credit for this. New sprouts were good. We didn't have any science. I shouldn't say any. There was virtually no science at that point on it. Now we have overwhelming science on that. Overwhelming science on sprouts. Just today I mentioned the Iranians gave us science on sunflower green. There was no such thing as a sunflower green sprout eaten in any culture. Our co-founder, Viktoras Klavinskis, brought that to the world. I said, how did you invent that? He said, I had a big bag of rotting sunflower. I threw it on the compost pile. It grew and I tested it. So some of these things are good mistakes sometimes. That's how they come about. So you know, you can't survive on the classic, traditional, natural hygiene diet. You can't survive on the classic, traditional, macrobiotic diet. And, you know, that's how it goes today. So sometimes we grow beyond certain things.
Two related questions. There's a current trend that pregnant women should not consume raw plant-based food. I'd like to hear all your opinions. And also, what's the best nutrition for pregnant women?
The raw living food diet, for sure. Yeah, and so that I am a testament for. And, you know, 9 amazing months of pregnancy, working every day and exercise and, you know, not having any limitations and giving birth. My babies fly out of me. And so, you know, absolutely. One time I tried to eat cooked food and I got acid reflux. I was like, heck with that, because that's very painful. And as soon as I got back to raw food, I was fine. And, you know, being pregnant, you don't eat for 2, but you eat very well. And in our form, we do juice. So we have like 16 ounces twice a day of amazing amount of nourishment. We put our sunflower, pea sprouts, our celery, cucumber, parsley, kale, cabbage, whatever you want to add onto that. And then we have big salads, and so we drink plenty of water. And, you know, it's absolutely the best diet. And a lot of pregnant women have come through our program. And
Tell about the fertility.
And the fertility. Oh, so many couples have come who's tried everything to get pregnant, even the hormones and the infertility programs. And many have got pregnant after a visit. We just had one. She said 3 months after we came to the Institute and went through the program, I got pregnant. So we call them Hippocrates babies. So there's a lot of Hippocrates babies out there. And one lady came in her 8th month, and she told us that she wanted to stay for a month. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to deliver. But she made it home to New York. She's from New York. And
We've had them come and stay and deliver babies
yeah,
there,
we've had. Well, we didn't deliver. We had midwives.
No, not me.
But, and I have midwives, and which is a wonderful thing. When you give birth, you have a midwife. That's like having a sister who's with you through the whole thing and the whole pregnancy. I highly recommend anybody to have a midwife. Even if you give birth in the hospital, of course, home birth is the ideal. But if you have some medical problem during pregnancy, you bring your midwife with you, and she will take care of you. So this lady came, and she had severe candida, yeast infection, and they were going to put her on heavy diflucan and medications like that, and she didn't want to cause any problem for the baby, so she came. And of course, she was fruit-free, and she did the program. She had an amazing time, amazing delivery, made it back home to New York. But so it is the perfect diet for pregnancy. But I'm not talking just a plate of lettuce, cucumber, and tomato. That's not going to make it. Sprouts have the hormones, it has the phytonutrients, have oxygen, has enzyme. It's the best the baby ever could get. So you're giving it amazing time for the 9 months that the baby is in the womb. And, at that time, your brain barrier, by the way, is open until you're about mid-20s. But it's really open in those days. So anything the mother eats gets right in through the brain barrier. So if I'm smoking, of course, that goes right into the brain barrier, like my mother did. Because my mother, now you're talking in the 50s, women were told that it was perfectly fine to smoke when you were pregnant. Well, we know better now, but still I see a lot of women smoke when they're pregnant. And I mean, that's horrendous because it goes straight in. We have children now that are totally addicted to opioids so much that they have to put on methadone the first 3 months of their life because it's horrendous what they have to go through to detoxify the drugs that the mother took. So everything that we do matters. And imagine the gift you give when you're giving this kind of food, this kind of nourishment. I mean, it's amazing. So every mother that has gone through it this way will be a testament to that. So, you can throw away a lot of ideas of what we've had in pregnancy in the past. And I hope that we have a whole generation that will listen to this and take advice from this. And fruit is okay.
And
Fruit is okay. Of course, prenatal supplements.
Whole food.
Every woman should take prenatal and maybe some more extra plant iron to add. And,
B12,
usually
of course.
B12, of course, and all the Bs are very important. Folic acid. So, but these are things you also start before you get pregnant so that you have a good base. So it's absolutely the best.
And I'm curious because you're a physician in Australia, and I know in Chinese medicine that there is a different thinking about raw and cooked food and yin and yang and all of that. And so I'm just curious when you heard that pregnant women shouldn't consume raw foods, if that came from Chinese medicine or where that came from.
In fact, that came from Western medicine. Because I've got 2 daughters, and each time they were pregnant, when they came out of our place, they told us, "Oh, we shouldn't eat any raw." We were told about
Maybe it was microbes on it or something.
Oh, okay. I think I know exactly what you're talking about. No, and you're right. What they're talking about is that they do tell pregnant women they shouldn't eat sprouts. And the reason for that is that sprouts, when you think about the way that sprouts grow, they grow in a very moist, warm environment. And so that's the environment that would breed bacteria. And so one of the foods that has the highest risk of contamination, and you do not want to get food poisoning when you're pregnant, is sprouts. And so when you're buying sprouts from a store or from a person that, your seeds need to be clean when you're sprouting. And of course, you know a lot more about sprouting than I do, but you certainly, there is ways of ensuring your sprouts are not contaminated. And so it's more about when you're purchasing from a grocery store, there's that risk because some of the worst outbreaks of food poisoning have been, really blamed on or caused by sprouts that were improperly sprouted or were not clean sprouts. And so that's what we're talking about. So I think the doctor wasn't talking about all raw foods. They were specifically talking about sprouts. And then the other question about nutrition in pregnancy, and of course I come from a little bit more of a, I don't know if you call it a conservative or mainstream tradition with nutrition in pregnancy. But I think it can be done in a variety of ways, depending on what a person feels comfortable with. But from a perspective of plant-based nutrition, there are a number of nutrients, and Anna Marie, alluded to a lot of these that we need to be especially cautious about. So during pregnancy, you want to make sure that you're meeting your needs for all nutrients, and the ones that you need to pay special attention to, especially if you're going more towards a raw diet, is there's a source of course, B12, as you mentioned, vitamin D, iodine, iron, zinc. Iodine is extremely important. And some people doing a raw food diet or even vegan who are not using iodized salt or any seaweeds, and especially in Europe where the soil is quite poor in iodine, they may end up short on iodine, and that's not a good thing during pregnancy. So, and even protein, you need a little bit more protein because you're growing this whole little new being. So you need to design your diet that would, in a way that would ensure all of those are met. And in the books that Vasanto and I have written, we've got plans to ensure that all of those bases are absolutely covered. One of the great benefits of going through pregnancy and lactation as a vegan or a plant-based person is the levels of persistent organic pollutants in breast milk are so much lower than they are in an omnivorous diet.
Give them some numbers. It's like shocking.
It's shocking. I know in the farm study years ago, I think there was 1% of the levels that there was in the milk of omnivores. So it's a tremendous advantage. And then, of course, the other nutrient to be thinking about is fat. And we need healthy fats during pregnancy, but of course enough essential fatty acids. And even though women, it's interesting, there was a researcher in the UK by the name of Dr. Burge, and he did 2 studies that I thought were absolutely fascinating, looking at conversion of alpha-linolenic acid into EPA and DHA. And he looked at a group of young men, and then he looked at a group of young women. And the young men converted, I believe it was 9% to EPA and 9% to DPA, which is an intermediary between EPA and DHA. And DHA, they didn't convert any, 0%. But the total was about 18% conversion. When they looked at young women, it was different. I think it was 9% to DHA, and even more to EPA, and then somewhere in between for the DPA, but a total of about 36% conversion. And the thinking was that young women have to be prepared for the possibility of having to grow a new little brain. And so their bodies need to be converting more readily than other people in the lives, including men. Yeah. And the one thing about the DHA that I wonder is if in men, when they're testing blood, for example, you don't want a ton of DHA floating around your blood. It's a highly unstable fat, so that it gets sucked into the tissues very, very rapidly, and that you only convert when you need the DHA. And so that's why men, it's just a theory, but there's obviously a reason why the DHA for men came out so low. Now, the other thing to know with vegans is even though our levels of EPA and DHA are significantly lower than they are in omnivores, we are able to maintain the consistent levels over many years. There was another study out of the UK that even after, I think it was 20 years plus, those levels were still, they don't just keep going down, down, down. The conversion seems to be reasonably adequate over time.
As we age, we maintain it more so.
So these are all considerations, but even with that having been said, I would still consider, because there's still many questions and we want to maximize our EPA DHA status when we're pregnant and lactating, of taking some sort of a supplement during pregnancy and lactation.
Okay. So if someone says sold, I don't need any more information about raw food diets. You convinced me it's great, and they're completely convinced. And they say on the ride home, I'm doing it, starting tomorrow. But I don't have a juicer, and tomorrow, Sunday morning, they wake up. So for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, what is exactly what they should eat for breakfast, what exactly should they eat for lunch, what exactly for dinner, assuming they want to be the healthiest person, they're not concerned about taste, they just want to know what would be, they want to get thin, they want to get rid of blood sugar problems, they don't want type 2 diabetes, they don't want cancer, they want to be healthy, they don't even need any description of why, they trust you, just what is the exact recipe, breakfast tomorrow, lunch, dinner, they don't have a juicer, they're not just for tomorrow, they don't have a juicer. What should they eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner in as much clear detail as possible?
Well, let's throw some nuance into that. Were they coming from the Western diet to this? Were they vegans before this, etc.?
They're in between.
So let's talk
Okay,
about
sorry.
both.
Okay.
Okay, now, it's almost going to sound like we're talking against what we said about 20 minutes ago. So a newbie who's healthy, why not eat fruit in the morning? And you can get ripe fruit, even in the middle of winter here, in the northern climates, called apples. They pretty much pick most apples. And pears, they pretty much pick ripe. So you can get those. I wouldn't depend upon blueberries you get from South America at this time of the year. You can almost say that they're never picked ripe, or those berries. So that would be a good start. Drink a lot. First thing in the morning, we get up, before we leave home, we have at least a quart to a quart and a half of fluid. When are you dehydrated the most? During sleep. Well, in our case, we drink mostly water. Sometimes because of where we live in the tropics, we put some coconut water into it. And if we put any juice of any type in it, it's 5% for taste, flavoring. That's about it. And then, of course, if they don't have a juicer, they should make sure they maintain something between breakfast and lunch, hydrate themselves. If they get hungry, that's when soaked and sprouted nuts or seeds would be a good thing to be taking to give you that filled feeling. If you've been used to eating God knows what, pancakes, holistic pancakes in the morning, something. Your main meal, and I should listen to this because we don't do it, your main meal should be the middle of the day. That's what we do know is the human body between 11:30 in the morning, 1:30 in the afternoon, has hydrochloric acid the most active, so that's when eating the higher protein foods would be most appropriate at that point. And then, of course, eating at night should be a smaller meal, maybe based on carbohydrates of that, beans, grains, something of that nature. And of course, if they don't have to be 100% raw, then at that point, eat a little bit of cooked food. And our research up in Boston showed that your immune system doesn't fall into leukocytosis when you're healthy till you get beyond about 25-30% cooked food. So you can actually eat a little bit of cooked food without having, a plummeting of the immune function at that stage. So I would probably say that that's a relatively, and before you go to bed, don't drink an awful lot before you go to bed. Try to drink before breakfast, before lunch, before dinner. That took me a lot of work because, my family would sit there with giant bottles of soda at every meal. And we flushed down whatever garbage we were eating with soda. And it was just hard. But we shouldn't be really diluting our enzymatic fluids that break down foods by drinking at the time we eat. We should try to combine foods correctly so that we're not putting a mixed mash of different foods that, by the way, biochemically make it more difficult for the body. It's just easier for the body if you eat pure, monolithically, as our ancestors did. And then vary it every day, because it gets boring to do these things until you have a life. Food was my life when I started this, because I was obese and I had to focus in on it not to be obese. And then later I realized once I got a life, food is a fuel. It's interesting. I'm like an expert in food. I'm not even that interested in food. This is just how I eat.
And I think I'll come at the question a little differently and just share what I eat.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
So what I have for breakfast every day, I don't need to vary it because it's varied naturally, is I like to eat my food. And of course you said no juicer, I do juice once in a while, but I usually have a breakfast bowl for my meal in the morning. And so my breakfast bowl, I do some sort of sprouted grains or some sort of sprouts. I do some fruit, so usually berries. I freeze a lot of berries in the summertime because I don't like to buy out of season. So I freeze probably 300 or 400 pounds of fruit.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I do.
You must be doing a lot of picking in the summer.
I do. And I'm fast.
You got to
The
be at that.
Blueberry Farm says I'm the fastest picker they've ever seen. Try to make use of my time. But anyway, I do that. So I have some, some fruits and some grains, sometimes sprouted, sometimes some cooked as well, depending on what we have available and if I'm running in and out or what. But it's always intact grains only that I use. Kamut berries or quinoa or whatever like that. And then I would have, I make a dehydrated granola as well, which is mostly seeds, to be honest. And you know how people use oil and sugar as their,
Main
whatever, to stick things together with granola. I just use a nut butter, a little bit of tahini and a little bit of nut butter,
that's nice.
and maybe an apple or something like that. And that's the moist ingredients, and then it's dehydrated. So I might have a little bit of that. I also have a jar of mixed seeds, so ground flax, ground chia, hemp, Brazil nuts for the selenium cut up, and that will go on my breakfast bowl. And then I often make, like a cashew cream, and then some sort of almond milk or something like that, and that's my breakfast. I have one giant salad a day, so it's either at lunch or at dinner, which is huge. People look at me and say, how can you eat all of that? It's a big, like a family-sized bowl, and I try to do vegetables of every color. I love watermelon radishes. I just love the color. So I love some purpley blue, and then that bright pink, and then always some orange and some peppers, and just a wide variety there. Always some sprouts, seeds, and I do the soaking and dehydrating of my nuts and seeds before I freeze them. So some seeds, and then I'll often have some sort of more like a legume, sometimes sprouted lentils, sometimes cooked chickpeas. It'll be something like that. And then my salad dressings are always a nut or seed-based dressing. So I'll take hemp seed and, blend it with, whatever I want to make a nice dressing. And I'll use some sort of lemon or lime or vinegar or something like that to make a dressing. I tend not to use oils. I just want more nutrient density. So I like to use nuts or seeds instead for the dressings. And so that would be a lunch or a dinner. And then the other meal, depending on whether it's summer or winter, if it's winter, I'll be more apt to cook the evening meal. My husband likes to have a warm meal when it's 30 below or whatever.
It doesn't get that cold there, does it?
It'll get to, actually this year it got to about 20 below.
Whoa.
But, so we'll have a stew or some meal, or we'll have a giant salad and a bowl of lentil soup,
I love that.
would go with it. Whereas in the summer, I might do something like a collard wrap that has a little sauce to dip, or something of that nature. Sometimes I'll make 3 or 4 different salads that are all cold, and then you want a cool meal in the summertime. So that's kind of how I eat, and yeah.
Well, I'm going to come to your house and eat. It sounds good.
Yeah, you're most welcome.
It's right up our alley.
So, let's say that you started the morning with cornflakes and milk. If that was your start, or one of those packaged cereals, then it would be a much better step to go to grains that are gluten-free and make your own cereal, like millet, quinoa, amaranth, teff. get some of those grains. You can buy them in any health store. And then take a cup of that and soak it a few hours. So like 3-4 hours is all it takes, really. And then you rinse it really well. And if you can't make it in 3-4 hours, then you can put it in a bowl of water and soak it in the fridge. And then it can be all night there. Rinse it really well. Take 2 cups of water, drain it, take 2 cups of water, and bring it up to boil, and then put it on the side. So that could be your hot cereal, which is so much better than the
Cornflakes.
Cornflakes,
Which
yes.
are acrylamides.
Yeah. So all those boxes, if they can go away from your counter and start feeding your kids better grains in the morning. And, you know, I mean, for us, food combining is the key, because I know when I directed a clinic in Sweden, and I had no idea about food combining, and my breakfast was every fruit under the sun, including the citrus and the grains and the nuts, and then make that a cereal in the smoothie. And of course it tasted great, but you were always bloated and you had no idea why you had all that gas, because there's certain things, fruit and grains don't mix. They don't mix well. So they have different digestive time. So if you really want to start feeling like, wow, I'm digesting better, I'm eliminating, I eat fruit by itself, and then I eat cereal by itself. It's so
And fruit
much
goes
better.
through so quick, that's easy to do.
Yeah. Yeah, so think about better grains that are gluten-free. First of all, for your kids, you do them amazing favor if you take gluten away. It's a big part of problems later, especially with diabetes. And they found that if a child eats gluten when they're first born, let's say after 3 months old, and they actually quadruple the risk of diabetes type 1 later on. So many people come to the institute and they were just diagnosed with diabetes type 1 and they're 30 years old, and we're like, how is this possible? Gluten, absolutely, lifestyle is a big part of this.
Years ago, they were misdiagnosed. They were all told they were 2s, and some of them weren't. Yeah.
Hello. Good evening. You've spoken before on the various facets that contribute to the success on the raw diet. And will you please speak on the possible psychological reason for yo-yoing on raw? And what we can do to help facilitate success on the living diet, both mentally, psychologically, emotionally.
Well, I think when you get onto a raw food diet, you plug into the energetic universe that all other creatures live in. So it's sort of like jumping on a wild horse that you're not familiar with riding. And so part of it is that it's a newfound energy. Number 2 is sugar. And that is really why the gyration or the yo-yo goes on. And we see that at the Institute every single week, 52 weeks a year. Because this is such a high protein diet. It's an amazingly pre-digested, amino acids are available, goes into the cell with a green drink as an example, regulates blood sugar. So every week, this is no embellishment. People say to us, I was a massive overeater. I could never stop eating. I'm not hungry. What's wrong? And what's not wrong is they're regulating blood sugar with proteins. So that's another good thing. I mean, when I first became a raw fooder, my favorite food was dehydrated organic pineapples. The day I found Medjool dates, I thought I died and gone to heaven, you know. And I didn't stop at eating 1 or 2. You know, I'd go back to the health store. Well, I'll get one tomorrow. No, I would go back and get another pound of it. So eating those types of seductive sugar drug things, you're going to yo-yo with this thing. And I think your diet was profoundly good for what she's discussing. Lots of nuts, lots of seeds. She grinds them up, makes them easy to digest. Really, really sensible. And if you ask what she ate 30 years ago, I'm sure she ate the way you did and I did and everything else. You know, you sort of learn these things. And you go, either you quit doing this or you learn how to do it. And that's really what it's going to take. It's going to take you experimenting, trying, following the kind of things that you hear us say. Look at the Hippocrates program, read the books that we've written, and it sort of gives a blueprint, an outline of where you could possibly make this easy for yourself.
It was about
42 years,
42.
42 years ago that I ever ate anything like that.
Yeah, you were like me. You were-
Right.
Typical Canadian diet. Remember
No,
Canadian bacon?
I started eating healthy, like really consciously healthy, when I was about 17.
Oh, yeah. You
So-
two are common.
Yeah, and it is an emotional thing because other people don't eat like you. So that is also one thing that other people feel intimidated by you taking a choice and eating different. So, we have a lot of, we have psychology sessions, we have group sessions for our guests, and I think a lot of this helps everybody too.
In our weight loss program, we actually do particular type of psychology. Not that you would need that, but I mean, we have an entire specific weight loss program. That, I mean, you'll lose more weight on our program than anything on the planet. But the reason is, it's psychological, more so. And here's something I learned 25 years ago that went right over my head. I was brought up by a really wonderful mother. She loved me. I never doubted she loved me. She was there every time I came home. But you have a mommy factor in this thing. My mommy, who I trusted and loved and never doubted, told me that the very things I was going to abandon and found were bad were good for me. Eat meat, it's good for you. Eat dairy, it's good for you. So you have the substance problem of getting rid of the addiction to the substance. You have the social problem that Anna Maria just mentioned. But more so, you have the mommy problem. So until I came to that realization, I'd say, why do these highly intelligent guests who actually see, we do blood tests at the beginning and the end, radical shifts all the time. There's never not a blood test that somebody's, we have the average drop in cholesterol during a 3-week period, it's really only 2 weeks between blood tests, 2 weeks in a day, is 50 points. Yeah, we see blood sugar regulate in 5 days commonly. But even with that, how come they keep cheating and going back? Because mama told them.
And I think the other thing is that I think one of the strongest human needs is the need to belong.
Acceptance.
Within your family, your tribe, your friends. And I think some people would sooner die than not belong.
You're right.
And that need is so strong that the only way I think of getting around that really is to, I mean, some people create a new tribe.
Exactly.
But most of us don't want to do that. We love our families and we and our friends, and we want I think is really to love them, but to share our wonderful food and to make foods that we know will be appealing and beautiful and just make it a part of their world as well.
You don't give them a sprout salad, you give them a veggie burger.
Yeah.
That's it.
And it works. It's interesting how open even the family members that you would think are completely closed. I can remember a couple of Christmases ago making 3 or 4 different kinds of fermented cheeses and the sprouted, dehydrated crackers. And I remember making, I mean, this was, a treat for Christmas, but the like turtles with pine nut, caramel with pine nut, and
Oh, yes.
That kind of thing. And the family, they were just thrilled to think that they could have these kinds of foods that were actually reasonably much healthier than whatever they were replacing. And so they were quite excited about it. And I think when you do it in that way where you're not pointing a finger and you're not making people feel badly, but you're sharing with love and excitement some really delicious food.
We learned that phytonutrients get destroyed as you cook them, as you cook the vegetables. How about steaming and making soup? Does that destroy the phytonutrients also?
There's lots of ways to kill something. You can either shoot it right out or torture it, but at the end of the day, it's dead. That's simple. We have polite words for killing, blanching, baking, but, Now, the mark line is about 115. So if you can keep it below, nothing wrong with soup. I'm cold when I'm up here. This is not a normal weather for us. So you could actually take vegetables you like, blend them up. You're going to kill a lot by this, but this is recreational stuff we're talking about. You blend it up, you put it in there, and heat it to 110, 115. As long as you don't spike it above that, then you still have the phytonutrients and the enzymes and everything else that you want. And it's still a warm soup, and it actually tastes better than when you cook it. When you cook it over, do it. Try this. Do this experiment worldwide. Blend up your favorite things, put seasonings in, heat it to 112, about 41, 42 Celsius, and eat that, and then take the same exact thing and cook it. And you're going to see there's a foul taste to the cook, where a rich and comprehensive taste to the raw. Or semi-raw, I would say.
As long as you can, if you can test it with your pinky into the pot, you're fine. Then it's less. And dehydrator is your new oven. Dehydrator, you keep it at 115 Fahrenheit. So by that time, you're keeping the phytonutrients, the enzymes, hormones, oxygen. You're keeping it. You have so much fun. I mean, we use it at the Institute every day. It's a part of crackers and nuts and seeds that's been soaked, sprouted, and we dehydrate so we can keep them.
You seem to use yours a lot, too.
And we make, pâtés, and, there's so many things that you can make.
Depends on what you're doing.
Well, most things take 24 hours. The nuts, the seeds. If I make bread, I make raw bread in there. Take a grain, even a grain that has gluten, like rye. If I soak and sprout it, now there's hardly any gluten left. So now I put it through the juicer, or if you have a, what do you call the other one?
Cuisinart.
Cuisinart, or I can make crackers, but I can also make bread. But I cannot make thick bread because it will totally ferment too much. But there's no limit. I can make veggie burgers in there. I mean, we have a lot of fun with that. Our kids are brought up with that.
So I'll just add a few things. So when you cook with phytochemicals, certain phytochemicals, will certainly decline. They won't disappear completely. Some phytochemicals, for example, the carotenoids, actually are more available in cooked foods than, say, a raw carrot. Less available than a juiced carrot, mind you, because you're removing cell membranes if you're juicing, and so it becomes very, very bioavailable. But carotenoids, generally, you'll increase the absorption a little bit. Now, with the other thing to know is the enzymes in foods, like myrosinase. So if you take broccoli and you eat it raw and chew it well, you'll get a lot of conversion of the glucosinolates to the isothiocyanates like sulforaphane. And you want that to happen. So if you cook, as soon as the steam hits the broccoli, your myrosinase isn't all destroyed instantly. It slowly diminishes over time. So if you're steaming and you steam for a very brief time, you'll still have reasonable activity. So again, if you're cooking, you want to cook for as little time as possible, and you want moist cooking methods more than dry cooking methods. The other thing to know is you lose probably 40 or 50% of maybe 30 to 50% of minerals in water, but more up to 70 or so % of vitamins, especially like vitamin C, which is lost very easily with cooking. So you'll also lose some vitamins and minerals. Now, if you're doing a soup, of course, you'll retain the minerals in the water, so that's an advantage as well.
There's this fun little trick. There's a steamer containers. Black & Decker did make them. I don't know if they do. But you buy, they're not expensive, $40, $50. You plug them in, and they tell you on the side to steam it, and it's perfect steam. Somehow they've made it in a way that geometrically it steams perfectly, that you put in a half a cup. So the trick we pulled off, we put in a quarter of a cup. So now it's a bit cooked on the outside, but as you pointed out, probably, I don't know what the number is, 50, 60, 70, 80% of it is not cooked on the inside. So now, if you're fighting cancer, maybe that's not what you do, but the average person.
The reason I ask is I have teeth problems.
Oh, yeah.
I'm in the process of getting taken care of.
Yeah.
But I can't chew anything hot. I love broccoli, I love carrots.
Yeah.
The only way I can eat them now is if I soften them up.
Yeah. But your point is not just a personal point. After 50 years old in Europe and North America, 60% of the population has some level of periodontal disease. So it gets increasingly, I mean, kids have bad teeth, but after 50, 6 out of 10 people have it. So it gets increasingly harder to eat raw food at that point. So, and the sad news is the blending research shows if you blend it up, even for a short time, you're oxidizing, killing most of the nutrients. I'm not sure, not as bad as cooking. I don't know that. That's my opinion. It's not a fact, possibly. But the fact is, it's much better to do that than it would be to eat the typical diet anyway and mush things up. Now, one of our favorite cooked foods is baked squash. Now, is there much in it? No. But the reality is it tastes damn good.
Well, I think there's still a lot of value with you are able to get a lot of a variety of carotenoids, and I think it's a wonderful food. So there are a lot of foods that are, I mean, you're not completely destroying the value of a food when you prepare, especially steaming vegetables.
So, I realize that you're not recommending everyone take the strictest approach, but for people that want to be optimal, you are saying that in the morning, Brian and Anna Marie, you're saying have a green juice with mostly sprout juice with 2 shots of wheatgrass, do it again at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and for lunch and dinner, you're saying have a big salad that has green vegetables and sprouts. And when we talk about sprouts, just to clarify, are you saying A, take the same whole grains, quinoa, millet, amaranth, teff, buckwheat, wild rice, or not wild rice, and sprout them and put them? Or are you saying B, take chickpeas, lentils, black-eyed peas, lima beans, sprout them and put them in your salad? Or are you saying C, take the little tiny seeds, the clover, radish, onion, garlic? For these 2 big salads that we need to fill us, get protein, really get it, what is the main thing? Which one of those are you saying?
I think all of the above. And the sprouts, as time went on, in the early days, I needed lots of beans, lots of grains, lots of heavy things. And as time went on, we gravitated more to the sunflowers, to the pea greens, to the light leafy greens. And I think it's where you are emotionally and physically and energetically. You know, at this point, we lift intensely heavy weights 3 days a week. We exercise aerobically 7 days a week. But the reality is, and we work like horses. But the fact of the matter is, your body becomes familiar with less food and with high energy at times. So I could not sustain, when I changed my diet to a raw food diet at the beginning, on what I'm doing today. So I think it's really an evolutionary process, and you've got to be sensitive to that. We watch people every week come in off Western diets and heavy vegan diets and everything else. And they detox. You know, it takes emotional, as we talked earlier, and physical detoxification. But as time passes, the body becomes refined and knows how to absorb the nutrients out of less food at high qualities.
And of course, it's important also to note that there are some legumes you can't eat sprouted. They would not be safe to eat sprouted, and the larger legumes it's the smaller legumes like lentils and mung beans that are really safe to sprout. Even chickpeas are a little bit debatable. Having some, fine, but you wouldn't want huge amounts because the levels of trypsin inhibitors are high enough to compromise amino acid absorption to a reasonable extent. So depending on how much protein you're eating, whether or not that would be an issue. But a lot of the larger legumes are very toxic, eaten, even sprouted. I mean, you're reducing some of the anti-nutrients when you sprout, but you can't eat things like red kidney beans sprouted. They have to be cooked before being eaten.
Well,
just to be clear.
This one I'm not sure about. So let's, one of the great debates I had was years ago. There was a very smart commentator in Baltimore, and around the same time they came out with a study from Hopkins saying that when you cooked a tomato, you got more benefit of the phytochemicals than in fact if you ate it raw. So the man called me up and pitted me against the scientist at Hopkins on the radio for an hour. That was there. And I listened. I didn't say much of anything. I just let them get in deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And they kept saying, well, we found You have actually more of the phytochemicals, and it's more evident when you cook, and there's no question that they're better for you, and they're going to be, which is true, by the way. These phytochemicals help breast cancer, and they help cardiovascular disease. So the man kept urging me. He said, "Are you going to say anything, Brian?" So I finally said, "Well, I'm so pleased to be on the radio with the scientists that created a new form of science. It's a new form of molecular science." I said, "Up until now, what I studied and what I've heard and what everyone has told me is basically that when you cook something, you burst the molecule, and that's why it radically shifts. What you're saying, doctor, it's brilliant. What you're saying is when you cook something, you manifest phytochemicals that weren't there to begin with. That somehow these phytochemicals come out of nowhere. They prevent themselves." I said, in my naivety, what I thought is that you open the cells from cooking, and now you can count the beans. You can actually count the phytochemicals. And I think when you germinate anything, it brings it back to a plant. And if you saw my segment on anthropology yesterday, it said that our teeth never ate nuts, seeds, grains, and beans, other than times of what? Droughts. Droughts were the only times that we ate that. And how we know that, the geologists got with the anthropologists and said, by the way, look at the teeth over thousands and thousands of years. They're eating leaves, they're eating fruit, they're eating leaves, they're eating fruit. There was a drought for this 10-year period, a 5-year period. Now they eat nuts, but by the way, in a 2-year period, a 5-year period, their teeth show they ate leafy greens again. So I would always say that if you're going to cook something, you germinate it first. And I would agree with that.
Oh,
You
yeah, I think it's great.
Yeah. But I'm not sure that we have to worry. And what the so-called poison we don't want to alarm anyone. The so-called poison is brilliant, by the way, that well before humans showed up, before the planet got screwed up, that we literally had every seed, every nut, every grain, every bean, which are all seeds, by the way, have an enzyme inhibitor on it that's a pesticide. So that particular form of seed would never, ever perish. So the animals would never eat all of them. They'd get sick and stop eating it. Isn't that unbelievable how nature does this? It's a symbiosis, a brilliance of nature, a spiritual process that goes on. And by the way, the bugs would never eat it. And that enzyme inhibitor is now what we're calling fancy words that you can't digest, and it may be, I wouldn't call them a poison, but they're not as pro-nutritious. But when you germinate it, that disbands, it goes away. And then, again, if you have these incredibly high fiber things like a kidney bean, and I agree with you on chickpeas, by the way. You can eat raw chickpeas, but boy, they're hard to eat. At the beginning, I needed to do that because I wanted something instead of the soy burger. I wanted raw something, but the reality is, I don't favor those things now, but maybe some people need it, and I don't want to alarm you that sprouted and raw, if you're fighting cancer, sprouted and raw chickpeas are going to give you poison. They're not going to give you poison. They may be a little harder. You sprout them enough, they're not going to be hard to digest. Comparative if you didn't sprout them. Try to think about a dried chickpea. How many of you would take it and try to chew it and swallow it? Well, think about that. I wouldn't do it. Would you do it? If you soaked it, easier, still hard. If you sprout it, you could chew it and swallow it. And so just think about it in logical terminologies.
Our chefs at the Institute makes amazing raw hummus from chickpeas, sprouted chickpeas. But of course, there are some sprouts that are much easier for you to digest. So if you're starting and you don't have a good digestion or your teeth are not functioning as well, then start with the broccoli, the alfalfa, cabbage, radish.
Light leafy greens.
Yeah, the light leafy greens like sunflower, because they're grown for 7 days at least, and they are so much easier to digest.
Mung bean sprouts.
Mung beans, sprouts, they're grown maybe for 4 or 5 days. Zucchini beans 4 or 5 days. And so if you sprout something just for 24 hours, that is not so easy to digest. And that's usually the beans. And even we serve some of the beans at the Institute, and some people don't digest them well. So I say skip them for now. But like Brian said, eventually you actually get used to them.
And then you don't want them anymore.
Yeah, and then you don't
get used to them, you don't want them.
Yeah. So the longer something has grown to sprout, 4 or 5 days, 7 days, the easier to digest it is.
And the more the anti-nutrients come down. But just to be clear, it's not so much the digestibility of course, the chickpea once it's sprouted, it's that it contains something called trypsin inhibitors, which inhibit the ability of trypsin, which breaks down amino acids from foods. so that we can digest those amino acids and use them. And so if you're consuming a lot of trypsin inhibitors, you're less able to digest and absorb the proteins, the amino acids that you need. So there's a sort of a limit of how many of those you would want to include in your diet because of that. Whereas with peas and mung beans and lentils, they have much lower levels of those compounds.
And by the way, pea sprouts are amazingly high in protein. Mung bean sprouts are amazingly high in protein. This is why Asian food, no matter where you are in Asia, thousands and thousands, they all had mung bean sprouts in their food.
But Brian, are you saying that you're in agreement to some degree with what Brenda's saying, that chickpeas, lima beans, big beans, if they're soaked and sprouted for 3 days, are still, because I haven't in the past heard you make a warning on certain beans.
No.
Brenda has some concerns of some of the larger beans. You're not concerned about them, or you are?
These enzyme inhibitors have never really been studied after germination at any significant level. You know, there's studies done on the beans themselves, but there's no long-term studies on sprouted beans. And that's, again, a whole other area that we have to look into.
Well, when it comes to some of the larger beans like kidney beans, we're more concerned about the hemagglutinins or the lectins than the trypsin inhibitors even. And in those cases, if you eat fairly raw kidney beans, have you ever eaten raw kidney beans?
No, I'm not
I mean,
interested in them.
they will make you violently ill. So that's, you know, there's some hemagglutinins that are really toxic.
Yeah, but you've got to think about this in a practical way, too. And I don't know what you have to, but I'm thinking about it. If I took a kidney bean dried, or if I took a chickpea, which is a bean, by the way, we call it a pea, but it's a bean, or a red bean, or a navy bean, or a pinto bean, or a black-eyed pea, all of these things. And I would never just take them, chew them, and eat them. So your body, you don't even have to know the science on it. Your body says, hey, you don't want that. You soak it. I really don't want that. It's still going to crack my teeth. I germinate it. It becomes increasingly easier to eat the longer you germinate it. But I have never seen a body of evidence. I hope there is a body of evidence
There
at some
is,
point.
actually. In Becoming Raw, we went through the literature and looked at exact percentages of reductions over time in, for example, in soybeans and in all of these beans, whatever science has been done, and what percentage of reduction you get with hemagglutinins. And of course, the longer you sprout, the greater the reductions.
Yeah.
But still, the general consensus is that the larger beans are probably not a good idea to be eating raw. But sprouting before cooking is a really good idea because you're vastly increasing, you're decreasing anti-nutrients and you're releasing nutrients and making them much more valuable foods.
You alluded to it, but that's what I found. Almost every bit of information was done on soya. I mean, that seems to be like they get stuck on soy. Why? Because it's such a cash crop worldwide. But, you know, kidney, I think I've read one thing on kidney, but I haven't seen on black-eyed peas, even chickpeas. I haven't seen real studies that show you
I can
are
show
there?
you.
Good,
Absolutely.
yeah, that's interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Hold on a second. So, as tempting as it is to move on, I just want to clarify. I mean, in your past 20 years, is large beans part of the program?
Yes.
Is this a non-point, or is it something that actually you do recommend and still recommend? In other words, Brenda's saying that she's got research that concerns her. I eat raw chickpeas. Are you recommending, you know, again, just let's clarify even further, like to what degree are you concerned about large beans?
We're not concerned from our observation, in my case, of using it for 48 years with people. I'm not concerned because I don't see it. It's not a main part of the diet. That's it. So this is why I'm open if there's real, and research, by the way, is just why I told this story about Johns Hopkins. There's somehow a disconnect between chemical science and what's really happening inside the cellular structure and anatomy of the body, and a lot of this is speculation at best. It's really not, we may see what's in the bean, we may see what's in the food, we may see the toxic level, but have we really taken it to the point where we've done human studies over long periods of time? That I've never seen, because nobody's interested in that. I mean, other than me or you, nobody's interested in that. So the studies are pretty much in there. I would like to see that. I don't see people having a problem with it. What I use these things, and not lots of them because I don't like them myself much, is when people are getting off heavy food, you need to give them something heavy that's not going to hurt them. Now, frankly, if you're not fighting a major disease, eating a cooked bean that's sprouted, big deal. Big deal, as long as it's not your main diet. But by the way, when I have a person who's fighting stage 4 cancer or HIV, which we do all the time, this is half of the people that we have coming to us, some major catastrophic disease, I can't say to them, by the way, you're only going to eat light leafy green sprouts and you're going to be happy. They're not emotionally ready for that. So a sprouted chickpea hummus that we sprout well and everything, I haven't seen a problem with that. Maybe it's not the perfect food, but I'm not going to tell these people to eat cooked food. Because one thing we have learned, without any question, and I used to make mistakes because I wanted people to like me when I was young, that if you are fighting a catastrophic disease, it's mandated, in our view, that you must be 100% raw. And usually for a couple of years to do that. When I try to be nice when I was young and say, oh, you can eat a little cooked food, I won't tell you what happened, but the outcome wasn't great in many cases. And we don't know who that is. There may be 50% of the people that could eat a little cooked food and get away with it and still heal, and 50% not, but we aren't going to take that chance. Our model for 62 years with tens of thousands of people that we've seen get well is get religion when you're sick. You don't need religion if you're not sick. You can mess around a little bit and have some fun, but the fact of the matter is, I consider these type of things we're talking about recreational foods more than we do therapeutic foods. Once you cook anything, it's really a recreational food. Although I eat some of that. That's it.
Is that his microphone?
Yeah.
Right in the front?
All right.
Go talk.
Yeah. No. Hello.
It's working.
Okay, now you can talk.
Awesome. First of all, I wanted to come back a little bit to the gluten topic that you touched on a little bit, but maybe first I wanted to add something to the current question. I also read some papers by Ibrahim and colleagues from 2010 and 12, and they studied cowpeas and kidney beans and chickpeas, and you have got this 100% reduction in raffinose stachyose, something like that, after 3 days of sprouting. Yeah. But as Brenda mentioned out, there's a couple of 50 or 60% reduction in trypsin inhibitors and stuff like that. So quite a bit in it still.
Big difference.
Yeah, but nevertheless, you mentioned that you have some issues with gluten. Would you be so kind to talk about this a little bit more?
Speak a little slower.
Sure. You touched on the topic gluten beforehand, and you said that you have some issues with it. So would you be so kind to touch on this a little bit more, and also in regarding with sprouting gluten-containing food? And Brenda, could you share your opinion as well?
Gluten definitely is a big problem in today's. And so many kids have problems, especially digestive problems because of gluten. And, so the studies that came out about that it actually quadrupled the risk of diabetes type 1 actually came out of Munich Hospital 40 years ago.
Munich.
Yeah, and the studies here in America came out a few years ago, and it said, oops, if you have diabetes type 1, you can't have gluten. And I thought, well, 40 years ago, we already knew that. And our kids are brought up without gluten. There's so many kids that have now celiac disease. And, it's because we've been overdoing it. We've had so much of the wheat flour in all kinds of forms, and we got allergic to it. So it's a big problem. And, of course, if I sprout, so I can take the grains that has gluten, like the oats, which doesn't have much, but still, and the rye and the corn, the barley and the wheat. Wheat, of course, by the time we grow it 7 days, it's a totally different thing. And very few, there's like one person a year that comes to the Institute that can't take the wheatgrass. And then
They're just lying.
No, they just can't. Right? It's like one person a year. And then we exchange it for blue-green algae instead, and they can drink it, and then they can do whatever we do. We do a lot of things with wheatgrass. We can't tell you all of it. We put it everywhere. So gluten definitely is a big deal for gastrointestinal problem, colitis, Crohn's, It's huge, and you know,
Autism?
autism, of course. Any parents with a child with autism that stops gluten will see an improvement. So we don't have any gluten at the institute, and if we use grains that have gluten, they're all sprouted. And like you hear,
Well, explain again what you said so we clarify. What happens to the chemical process when you
do.
germinate? Well, no, so the amino acids, the proteins become usable because it goes from a complex protein to the amino acids. The essential fats become essential fatty acids. Very easy for the cell to pick up. And the carbohydrates, simple sugars. So this is why, again, you go back, it's similar. If you take a wheat and try to chew it, you'd never swallow that. You'd break your teeth in the process. Soften it, and the softening process becomes digestibility of it. And keep going back to the fact now, we wouldn't have naturally eaten these foods at all at one point. We would have preferred, and I did an experiment back in Boston. This is when I was just a kid. It was maybe 1981, 82. I just had become the director. And I said, you know, do we still have any instinct at all? Because I started to notice at that point when my head got clear, I didn't like romaine lettuce and I didn't like iceberg lettuce. I would prefer the light leafy green lettuce. And I thought, is that me doing that or psychological? So I used to put lettuce out for a 2.5-month period, for a 10-week period, and watch what the people chose. We'd have 100 guests or so, and I'd put it out, and inevitably, everyone instinctually went for the light leafies. And then, of course, when that was gone, they would go and take the more standard. So even though iceberg lettuce is the lettuce we all get everywhere in the world when you have a salad, and that's what people are familiar with, instinctually we still want light leafy things. And the germination gives you that. Makes it easy.
I have a couple of things to say. First, I just wanted to thank you for coming up here and presenting this information. It's a wonderful thing. I want to touch on sprouting. Brenda, you ran through like a whole list of stuff. I've been sprouting pulses for over 2 decades successfully, but I'm sprouting one that you didn't mention, and I want to know what you think of, if you consider it a larger unsproutable bean. That's Adzuki. You can answer me when I'm done. And the other thing is, a lot of other beans, I've been hearing things lately in the social media and on the internet about beans and leptins. Now, if either of the Clements could speak to those because of their success with sprouting, about leptins and sprouts. That's basically it.
Well, Adzuki beans, I haven't seen research.
One more thing.
Yeah.
Oh, I couldn't tell at first if there was sound coming out of the microphone. Like I said, I've been sprouting pulses successfully for over 2 decades, but I still have problems sprouting successfully smaller beans, smaller seeds, the radishes, the alfalfa, the broccoli, and so forth. No matter what rinsing technique or medium that I am laying them down on, I'm not having a success with them. If you could maybe speak to that after answering the other question, that would be wonderful.
Mm-hmm. So I believe that Adzuki beans would be safe to sprout. Yeah. So, and then the other question about, I think that was your question, really. About lectins. Well, lectins, that's the hemagglutinins in beans, and there's a lot of, it's one of the probably most popular diet craze right now is a lectin-free diet, and so it's a very much more of a meat-centered way of eating for sure to get rid of lectins. Lectins are naturally present in plants as a, to help protect the plants, and so they're there, and so but the probably the most concentrated source of lectins in the human diet would be legumes. And when you cook legumes for 15 to 20 minutes, you pretty much completely destroy the lectins. And most people eating legumes on a regular basis are cooking them for probably an hour and a half, depending on their size. If you're cooking legumes, you want them to be able to just crush with your tongue on the top of the roof of your mouth. and the lectins would be gone. And to me, I always say this, but the acid test to me is look at what the healthiest, longest lived people on the planet are doing. Every single blue zone, the one food they all commonly eat is legumes. If they were poisoned because of the lectins, they probably wouldn't be the longest lived, healthiest people on the planet.
Or they're
you
the
know?
luckiest longest lived.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of ridiculous to me. And then you look at the studies, the mortality studies on legumes versus meat. Legumes, the studies on mortality consistently show benefits and increased longevity with legume consumption, and with meat, they consistently show reduced longevity, increased mortality, and increased risk of pretty much every chronic disease we can think of. So,
Because
yeah.
they're part of that the people in the 5 blue zones. Matter of fact, one of my colleagues and good friends, Dr. Yu, happens to be Japanese, and he went down and hung out, lived with him. He said, I want to figure out how to live to 105. And he gave me some insight that was amazing. It's amazing how extraordinarily popular people can come when they are marketed well. And now this gentleman who wrote this book basically has sold 68 million copies of that book. I don't know of another health book that even come close to that, to be honest with you. I mean, if you put the 10 best authors together, I don't think we match that. That's a lot of health books. So I read it, but I forget what's the name of it again.
I forget.
Yeah. What is it?
Plant paradox?
Plant paradox. Plant paradox. Okay, now I didn't, I went through it. I was reading 2 other books because I was sort of disinterested. It is pseudoscience. So Dr. Furman last night, who I've obviously read all of the references that in there. Now I didn't read it, so I'm just quoting Dr. Furman. So I can't confirm this, but I can't imagine he's making this up. He said when he looked at several of the references, they weren't real. That the gentleman cherry-picked. I know one thing, his resolution is to eat meat, and that's wrong. So he's telling you, don't eat beans, which, by the way, the longest living people in the world eat, but in fact, chicken's fine for you. Yeah, is it? Yeah. So, I mean, and we don't have to make this guy bad. Maybe he had the right intent. Maybe he really meant well. Maybe that's where he is at this point. You're all being cheated, by the way. All 3 of us will know more tomorrow. So we don't know as much today as we know tomorrow. And so whatever it is, let's hope he came from the purest right intent, and that's where he is at this point. But sadly, if you can affect 68 million people and the people they touch, and they now start eating chicken rather than cucumbers, I'm a little concerned about that.
And then there was a question for you, Anna Maria, about
On sprouting. Oh yeah, that's odd. The easy ones you're having a hard time with.
Yeah, the broccoli, alfalfa, and all of those. I mean, usually we at the institute sometimes we grow and still right in a jar. But then it's the water quality because
It could be the seed too.
It could be the seed. Yeah, you have organic seeds, and you had and you had good water. It's filtered water.
You have to
It's
really,
not just
really,
tap water.
if there's a little bit of schmut, a little bit of dirt inside of the jar, it could contaminate the whole thing.
Yeah, something good to clean the jar, like Shackley has a basic G, and you put it in a big spray bottle, just a little bit, fill it up with water. That you could wash the bottle with that. And
Peroxide.
Make sure.
Go to the dollar store, buy 2 peroxides, sit
Yeah.
it in. Yeah, that
Yeah.
could get it.
Yeah. Yeah, but don't give up. Keep doing it.
One thing, some seeds need a specific temperature to germinate. I don't know, I mean, for instance, tomato seeds. You cannot germinate tomato seeds if they're too cold, but I don't know if that has anything to do with it. 2, I started out with 1, now I got 3. Very quick. I have read, yes, it's cooking, but I have read in more than 4, maybe even 5, cookbooks, all vegan by various well-known authors. You cannot cook, and I know we're talking mostly raw here, but just back to your red kidney beans, specifically stating that you cannot do red kidney beans, in anything but a boil first because of, I don't remember the name of whether it was a lectin or whatever, but specifically that you could not use, like for instance, a crock pot to do kidney beans.
Oh, is that right?
All the other
Why not a
beans are
crock pot?
fine, but that you must,
Oh, no kidding. Huh.
that red kidney beans must be boiled because they were truly poisonous without. 3, I have been for a long time listening to the positive things of a smoothie, i.e. the fiber and the entire plant, whatever the plant might be, as opposed to a juice of basically the same plants. And I've heard a lot of juicing in the last 48 hours, but very little smoothie talk. And again, I'm not being specific about what goes into the blender or juicer, but just the concept of mashing them all up together or no fiber. Thank you.
Great questions. I'll
Yeah.
start with the first about the red kidney beans. Yes, in order to destroy the lectins, which are probably the most toxic lectins in red kidney beans, it is recommended that they be boiled, and crock pots often don't hit the temperature you need to destroy them. And the only studies that I know of that have showed sort of negative outcomes are often, there was one where they served undercooked kidney beans, and I believe they were cooked in a crock pot, and the whole hospital, all the patients were deathly
Their
ill,
kidneys fell
vomiting
out.
they were vomiting. You vomit for 4 or 5 hours, and it's like a horrible food poisoning with undercooked red kidney beans.
But yet you're saying that you can sprout red kidney beans
Oh, sure.
successfully and healthily.
And once you sprout them, they're much more volatile and vulnerable to heat. So I don't know,
Whatever that.
yeah, but when you sprout anything, it becomes easier to cook and kill.
So,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
With everything, always try. And that's what you're doing.
yeah, I do that a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I do. I definitely sprout what I can. And then the other questions, the smoothies versus the juices, you'll definitely want to weigh in on this. I'll just tell you what my perspective is. It may be very different. I see the juicing, you're taking out a lot of the plant cell walls. So of course the fiber is a lot lower in juicing, but what you're also doing is the plant cell walls, you're taking out a lot of the substances that inhibit the absorption of things. So you're making the phytochemicals and antioxidants that you're downing super absorbable. And so for use in treatment of cancer or in treatment of disease where you really want to boost antioxidant status, there's probably no better way to do it than with juicing greens and sprouts and so forth. So I think that there's a very good therapeutic reason to do juicing. Now with the smoothie, you're getting the whole thing, you're blending the whole thing, and some people believe you get some destruction happening of nutrients and so forth. I know Dr. Esselstyn is highly anti-smoothie because he believes that it destroys endothelial cells and so on. My take on smoothies are it's a way better for people who are running out the door in the morning to take a green smoothie and slowly sip it, to have something of value to consume. And you can put some hemp seeds to give a little bit extra protein and so on, and have a reasonable meal. My preference, I never drink smoothies because I like to eat too much. I like chewing my food. I don't want to down my breakfast like that. I really enjoy eating. So that's why I don't have smoothies, but I can see for athletes or for people trying to get quick nutrition when they're on the go, that it could be a reasonable option for some people. I would never recommend it for someone with diabetes because things are absorbed so quickly and there's a lot of calories there often. And so I think it's better for them to chew and eat their food. So it depends on the individual situation, but I'll let you chime in.
Well, let me preface this once again, like I did with fruit, to say congratulations if you're taking smoothies rather than coffee and alcohol and sodas. So it's certainly a step in the right direction. Now let's give you a little bit about anatomical science, chemistry, biochemistry. When you're eating a healthy diet like this, a vegan diet, a plant-based diet, and certainly a raw diet, 80% of your food is digested in the saliva, the enzymes in your mouth. Now this is not an opinion, this is a fact. So, and I should listen to this one too, because I don't chew well enough. I teach you to chew, and I'm on the run, and I notice I'm chewing a few times and swallowing. And it is horrible to do that. So no matter how much we're spending on organic food and vegan food and plant-based food and raw food and all this great stuff, if you don't chew well, you're not going to get nearly the benefit out of it you should. Why? Because it doesn't interact with the enzymes in the mouth, and you can't digest it. Number one, juice is used completely therapeutically. So I can take 2 pounds of an incredibly nutritious food, juice it, and drink it, as long as it doesn't sit, because if it sits, it loses more than the 90% that we discovered from a colleague of mine who was a research medical physician at University of Miami when this fad came out, where he reversed liver cancer with us. He literally discovered that 90% of the nutrients were gone within 90 seconds. Now that was pretty easy to do. He took 3-4 ounces of food, knew what the nutrient value was, put it in, analyzed the food after it, and that was it. And the cheaper blenders, the $30 blenders, were 3 or 4% better. And the Vitamixes, the ones really fast that we all love and own, that killed 3 or 4% more in that short period of time. The biggest problem we have, and I completely concur with you on this, is forget only diabetes. When people don't chew the food, and I have a hard time chewing solid food, no less a blended food, and you swallow it, now you bypass the whole digestion process, and if you happen to be a slow metabolizer, you're going to get heavy from doing this. And that's why I see so many overweight people who are taking these smoothies, these blender things every single day. And if you're a fast metabolizer, you're going to be emaciated. You're going to look like you have anorexic conditions. So this is not only a scientific understanding, it's what I see. So people are coming to us and say, I'm eating healthy, I'm eating a raw food diet, and they're taking 2 or 3. And I can tell you, if that thing became a fad when I started this, I would have put a half a gallon of coconut oil in there. I would have put honey in there. I would have put 3 apples in there. I would have put a mango in there, the dried pineapples. I'm telling you what I would have done, not what you would have done. I'm telling you what I would have done and what many people listening would have done and thought it was healthy. And boy, that would have been a disaster for everything in my body. And then other people do bad combining. They take leaves of kale in there. Kale's a great food unless you have a thyroid problem. You have a thyroid problem, you don't want to touch kale. You don't want to touch the cruciferous family. And then they put an apple in there, then they put a mango in there, and they put some kind of a sweetener in there. It's problematic in my mind, but I also concur with what you said. That's why I preface this. I'd much rather have you do that than I would soda. I'd much rather have you do that.
I was asking carrot juice.
Well, carrot juice hasn't...
Versus carrot smoothie.
Okay, carrot juice has not been part of... Carrot and beet juice has not been part of the program since 1980 when I became the director.
Same ingredients.
Well, let's explain sweet versus not so sweet. If you take 1 quart, a liter, a little over a liter of carrot juice, it has about 1.5 cups of sugar in it. So if I distilled it out, I could have crystallized sugar there, 1.5 cups. Beets are worse. In Europe, a lot of these people are from Europe here, they get their sugar from beets. So why we love carrots and beets, why I used to drink a gallon of it a day, because it was healthy, is because I was a flaming sugar addict. That simple. But then I discovered mango, and it was actually sweeter than that. So, okay. So when you take a carrot and put it in a high-speed blender, it's indigestible. It is still, what doesn't break down is a high sugar fructose content. So you still have the fructose content. It's indigestible. You've oxidized a lot of it. Could you take a carrot? Think of this logically again. Could I take a carrot, especially these juice carrots, put it in my mouth, not chew it, and swallow it? That's virtually what you're doing when you blend it up and swallow it. Now, just because it's mushed up doesn't mean it's not the same kind of a problem. Your body's smart enough to say, I'm gagging it out, you can't do this, don't do it. But when you blend it up, the body doesn't say that.
Yeah, so you're cheating your body because you're drinking it. You're drinking the smoothie, everybody does. They're drinking the smoothie as if it was juice. And you don't have the help to digest that. You don't chew it. It's not your meal. You don't sit in a bowl and eat it with a teaspoon. Juice is different. It doesn't come with the fiber. It's like a blood transfusion. So it's totally different when it comes in. You know, what we see, for example, with wheatgrass, 2 ounces of wheatgrass is like 5 pounds of food. If I put that in a blender, first of all, wheatgrass we could never digest in a blender. But let's say that we did. I would never get that amount of nourishment out. So you deoxygenate it much faster in a blender. Things you can do in a smoothie, like you can take some good protein, like hemp protein or fermented rice protein, and add your chia seeds and add blue-green algae, and so you can have a smoothie like that on the go. A lot of big athletes come through the institute, and they want something to keep them, especially before and after exercise. So that's what they do.
Now that seems to work.
Okay, so let me wrap up. We have 3 minutes left, and let me just ask one final question. So the final question is, couldn't you make the argument that we should ignore everything that you've said tonight? Because in reality, it's so hard to change people that we're better off just saying, go eat quinoa, eat chickpeas, eat sweet potatoes, cooked food is good, have some pasta, and that a raw food diet is too ambitious. And even though it might actually scientifically be healthier, we're not going to convert enough people because it's not enough people are going to want to sprout, where everyone could open up a can of chickpeas, pour in some salsa, put a little salad dressing, and they would do it. So even though you might be saying the best information, maybe it's too good, the information. We should just take a simpler approach that would bring more people on board. And we only have 2.5 minutes to answer that.
Well, my approach has never been to try to seduce more people to do the right thing. My approach, and Hippocrates' approach since 1956, has been teaching people what the right thing is. So no, I don't think this is extreme. I think it's extreme the way people are moderate. I think it's extreme that people are willing to do halfway things. I think it's extreme that people are comfortable, not doing their best. I think that's all extreme. And it's not scientific although we can give you the science as I write in every one of my books and I can quote, but the reality is it's practical. We see the difference. People get on raw plant-based diets that are organic, they get better. When they don't get better in every case. When you get on a vegan diet, you're going to be better than the Western diet, but not as well, and I haven't seen people on vegan diets recover from catastrophic cancers the same way I do on a raw food diet. So to us, it's very practical, it's historic, it's decades. We're in our 7th decade now of doing this. We're 2 years in our 7th decade of doing this. So this is an experiment that seems to be working, so we keep doing it.